This week, our sister station, ABC7, is telling the story of the heroin epidemic like we haven't seen before. The series is called Heroin Highway, and it's a week-long look at the epidemic confronting America that kicks off tonight. Joining us now in studio is 7 on Your Side, fighting back against crime reporter Jennifer Donelon. Also with us, Kevin Simmers. He's a former Hagerstown police officer, a former soldier in the drug war, whose life and whose family was ripped apart when heroin got its hooks into his own home. Good to have you both here. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Jennifer, we're seeing, we're being reminded that heroin doesn't discriminate. No. It's gotten real cheap, and the stuff that's on the street now is unpredictable. Mm-hmm. So this is having many impacts on individuals and families.
Yes. What we're doing tonight and all week long, we're taking a look at the heroin highway. And this was something that was new to me. This came from a member of our staff, this tip, about Interstate 70 and 81 leading out of Baltimore, going through Hagerstown, Martinsburg, West Virginia, Winchester, Virginia. Law enforcement in those areas saying that they're heroin addicts, this new wave of heroin addicts, which finds its source in prescription pain pill abuse for the majority, that they are driving to Baltimore, which is a heroin stronghold and has been for decades, sometimes twice a day to get their heroin. Baltimore is not the reason why we have a local heroin epidemic at all. They're not the reason why we have a heroin highway, but what we're seeing are unbelievable numbers. I know we've been talking about heroin for a couple of years, but based on what we're starting to see come in from 2015, the numbers aren't getting any better. People are dying. Overdoses are happening around the clock. And Kevin was gracious enough to share his story with me for this series, and it was one of the most compelling interviews I've ever done. I was in tears as I was learning his story about his daughter.
And we certainly want to talk about that in depth in the moments that follow. Can you talk, Kevin, first about what you experienced on the front lines as a member of law enforcement? Are people turning to heroin because it mimics a high that they used to get from drugs, that there can be an issue with getting prescriptions refilled?
Right. Well, why people turn to heroin, you know, I mean, I think normally the model is where people just don't feel like they fit in for whatever reason, and they'll turn to pills, whether it be Percocet or oxycodone. And as the addiction progresses, they'll move on to heroin because it's a much cheaper drug, much easier to get on the street, and it's very inexpensive.
And we don't know what's in it. It varies a lot from batch to batch, from buy to buy. So folks are rolling the dice even more than it would obviously be true in terms of a drug of this nature.
That is correct. I mean, it's an opiate, and the amount that's actually in what you're shooting up, I mean, is unknown to the person who is using.
I think the scary thing too is, you know, growing up, you know, they used to warn us about alcohol, marijuana. Unfortunately, if things continue the way that they're heading, I think that you're going to now see messages as just sort of standard status quo, don't do heroin. And that's hard to imagine.
It is.
Nobody ever had to tell me not to do heroin, but it has become such an easy, quick move from prescription pain pills, which teenagers in high school are dancing around with, dabbling with, and they're moving straight to heroin because a pill of oxycodone on the street is $60 a pill, whereas a capsule of heroin is only $10. So it's just easier, and they're moving to it and they're getting addicted.
Yeah, as far as education goes, I mean, my daughter, she knew about the hazards of cigarette smoking, the hazards of alcohol, but nobody ever talked to her about the hazards of opiates and heroin. And kids are now more afraid to smoke cigarettes than they are to move on to shoot up with dope.
And she really fought.
Correct. Yes.
You really fought too. I mean,
yes.
your journey as a parent was mind-boggling to me.
We went to probably five or six different rehabs in the year prior to her passing, where we tried it. She either would wash out or she would complete it and then relapse, and then we go back again. It was mind-boggling, the obstacles you got to go over to get into treatment or to get into rehab. I mean, it's very difficult to get into treatment. When people want to get into treatment and want to clean themselves up, it's very difficult to get in from insurance companies and bed space. It it was a nightmare.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, you've gone to extra lengths to be here, distance traveled, dealing with the weather, and to me that reflects the sense that you have now dedicated yourself to helping every family that you can possibly reach that might be engaged in this similar struggle.
Yeah, I mean, listen, for 30 years I was as a police officer, and as a police officer, you know, our job was simply to arrest people up, and we didn't look at the other side. After going through what my family has been through, I mean, now when I see a drug addict on the street or I see someone suffering, I realize that there's a story behind that person. And if we could offer them treatment on demand, you know, we'd be so much further ahead as a people. We spend $40,000 a year to incarcerate somebody. If we had $40,000 a year to rehab somebody or a jobs program or education, I think it'd be much better spent.
You know, we got a note last night, and just breaks my heart because we get these all the time from parents, because we've been pushing the fact that this heroin series is starting this evening. And this mother says, I am watching my son die. My son is going to die. She knows it, and she feels completely helpless. And I know that's how the parents feel. You said that you dropped Brooke off at places that he wouldn't drop his dog off, because they're just so bad. And she had your health insurance, but how many heroin addicts get locked up, lose their health insurance, can't afford treatment? When you started looking for treatment, how difficult was it to just sort of navigate through all of that?
I mean, even just when you're Googling treatment in Maryland, I mean, Google treatment or halfway houses, and you know, I would tell the viewers to look and see if you can get somebody in treatment if you had a kid that was 19, 20 years old. Bed space is full. And many times when you call, they'll say, well, for instance, today is Monday. They'll say, well, call back Thursday or Friday. We may have bed space open by then. But in an addict's life, 3 or 4 days could be life or death.
Is there any way to explain to the person who doesn't know the pull and the need that the next fix represents? Is there any way for those of us who don't have that and are grateful, well, we should all be grateful that this is the case, is there any way to convey how life is transformed by that?
You mind if I start real quick and then toss it, because you saw it. There is a woman who just kicked it 90 days ago who you're going to hear about in the series. She gives one of the greatest sound bites to me that explained it like that. She said, you go to sleep with your shoes on so that there's nothing between you and your next fix when you wake up in the morning. It's just that strong. But you talked about your daughter in the front yard.
Right. There was a time where my daughter, we were trying to detox her at our house before we went into a treatment program. And so I was up the whole night making sure she wouldn't leave, and I caught her sneaking out of the house on the front yard. You know, she just fell to the ground, you know, and asking me to shoot her, put her out of her misery, because she had to go get her heroin. And it was her drive. She told me once when she was going through a rehab program that her drive for heroin and to get high was the same as my drive for oxygen. She said, put your hand over your mouth and nose and hold it there for 45 seconds, and the drive you have to remove your hand, that's the drive she had to get her heroin.
I don't know if you started out, Jennifer, thinking we're going to do a 5-part series on this, but certainly over the course of your investigation with all the people you talked with, you realized this is so big right now, the impact is there, the number of angles you can focus on that make for good journalism and good for good community service.
Yeah.
You very quickly ended up with the 5-part series.
Yeah, we're actually up to a 6-part. We moved into a 6-part, but I'll tell you what, the elephant in the room is this. The inner cities, especially a place like Baltimore, has been dealing with heroin for decades. You do have members in the black community who are coming out and saying the only reason why this is getting attention now is because this issue has moved into the white suburbs. We're going to address that in one of the pieces. You really have to see all 6 pieces to really get a full picture of what's going on in West Virginia, what's going on in Martinsburg, what's going on in Hagerstown, what's going on in Baltimore. This is all playing out. And if you think that this doesn't touch you or affect you, unfortunately, you could be seriously, devastatingly wrong about that.
Can you tell us about the sound from the series that we're about to hear here?
Sure. This is Israel Kaysen. He's in Baltimore. He's a 30-year former heroin addict. He's been shot 13 times. He used to hold up dope dealers, and this was the biggest cry that we heard about the entire Heroin Highway series, was the need for treatment, and this was his reaction in terms of that.
The so-called experts never lived this. They don't really know what's going on. They see the surface. They don't understand the science of chemical dependency.
Okay, you talked about this as well. He just said the so-called experts have never lived this. They don't really know what's going on. You said that addiction, we haven't even begun to deal with that. And this really boils down to a problem of addiction in our society. And we're we are not dealing with these addicts. We're locking them up and putting handcuffs on a heroin addict is not solving the problem.
The first thing that heroin addicts say when they're arrested by law enforcement is, "Take me to a hospital." When you're arresting somebody and taking them and they're asking to go to a hospital, that is not a criminal justice problem. That is not a crime. That is a health problem, and we need to address that. And you know, and I've said oftentimes, I'm not running for political office, but the number one problem in our country is not ISIS, is not the Mideast, is not terrorism. The number one problem, number one threat to our country is opiates and heroin addiction.
As long as this conversation has been, and we're going to keep following this issue in the days and weeks and months to come, as long as it takes. Jennifer, your story launches tonight. Where can people see it?
Tonight, ABC 7 News at 5 o'clock. We're going to be 5 o'clock Monday through Thursday. We're going to be at 4 o'clock on Friday, 5 o'clock on Friday. Kevin is coming back on Friday. We're going to have this phone bank. We're bringing the experts to you to help these families. Also, we need to talk about Brooks' house really quick. You are building a house. He is living out his daughter's dream to have a place where women can recover from substance abuse with some dignity.
Yeah, her dream was to have a sober living house, and you can check out the website at brookshouse.org. One word, brookshouse.org.
Kevin and Jennifer, such an important topic. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time
you
on this
so
holiday
much.
Monday. Great having both of you here. And Kevin, we'll be talking with you again. Best
Thank
of luck.
you. Thank
Jennifer,
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're back right after this.